Good evening. Welcome, everybody. My name is Amila Golich, and I'm Assistant Director of Programs at the Chicago Council on Global Affairs. It's a pleasure to see you all here tonight, even despite our terrible Chicago April weather. Thank you to our members in attendance today. Your support is critical to our work. If you're not yet a member, please consider joining. We have a wide variety of levels for you to choose from. The Council is an independent and nonpartisan platform. The views expressed by the individuals we host are their own and do not represent institutional positions or views of the Council. Thank you also to the Stigler Center for the Study of the Economy and the State at the University of Chicago Booth School of Business, with whom we partnered to develop this program. Please silence your phones, but not your voices. We are on the record and we are live streaming, and we definitely welcome your social media engagement. It's also definitely appropriate for today's topic. Later, we'll be taking audience questions through microphones around the room or online at chi.cnf.io. And finally, before I turn it over to our panel, a few very brief words of introductions for them. Barry Lin is Executive Director of the Open Markets Institute. He previously spent 15 years at the New America Foundation, where he was in charge of their research on monopolies. Carl Shapiro is Professor at the Haas School of Business at the University of Berkeley, where he focuses on competition policy, industrial organization, patents, and innovation. Luigi Zingales is the Robert R. McCormack Distinguished Service Professor of Entrepreneurship and Finance, the Charles M. Harper Faculty Fellow, and the Faculty Director of the Stigler Center at the Booth School of Business. Our moderator tonight is Jesse Eisinger, who is a senior reporter and editor at ProPublica. He's also a Pulitzer Prize winner for national reporting on a series of stories about the financial crisis. His latest book is The Chicken Shit Club, Why the Justice Department Fails to Prosecute Executives. I will return to moderate Q&A, but for now, please join me in welcoming our panel.
Thank you so much, and thank you for coming tonight, braving the weather. I got here with my Apple phone via Google. I have in my hand 2 items that I've ordered on Amazon, and I don't like Facebook, so I don't have anything there. But so I thought we'd start with a quick straw poll, very scientific here, and then I'm going to launch into questions. How many of you in the audience have never searched on Google? Never? No? Anybody primarily use a search engine that is not Google? Oh, there we go. Two. So that's 1% of the audience. Anybody never used Amazon? One lonely, brave soul, courageous. Is anybody, I think this is going to be more likely, but is anybody not on Facebook? There we go. So roughly maybe 15%, 20% of the audience. Has anybody gotten off Facebook there we go, 2 people in the last 48 hours, 2 weeks? There we go. Okay, so are these companies monopolies? Are they dangerous? We're going to discuss this tonight, and then we'll open it up for questions, and I'm sure you guys will have plenty, so prepare them. But so the first question, I think we're going to primarily talk about the market power and political power of Facebook, Google, and Apple, and Amazon tonight. Are these companies monopolies? Carl Shapiro.
The word monopoly suggests the only company providing the services they provide. That's not going to be true for Amazon. There are a lot of other retailers. So I'm not sure they're a monopoly. I would tend to say no. But in antitrust, which I do a lot of antitrust, the real question is, do they have enough economic power, market power, that special responsibilities apply? That if they use that power unfairly or in a way that can damage competition, that they're going to be breaking the law in antitrust. And these companies have a lot of economic power. In antitrust, we'd have to define exactly what market do they have the power in. The Europeans would call it dominant. We would call it monopoly here. So I would say for the purpose of our discussion, we should figure they all have a lot of economic power, so we should treat them, at least from the antitrust world, as monopolies.
Okay, so do you guys agree essentially with that premise that it's not that important to define them as monopolies? and that we should only be concerned with their market power and political power, or do you think there's something important about thinking of them as monopolies?
Go ahead.
I mean, I think it's important to think of them as monopolies. And actually, I generally agree with Carl's definition. And I'll just add a monopoly, but I'll add a little twist to it, which is I tend to use Milton Friedman's definition. And what Milton Friedman said is if you have sufficient power within a marketplace to sort of really set the terms on which deals are made, then we're going to count you as a monopoly. So by that standard, certainly Amazon, Google, and Facebook are monopolies. They are centralized powers. They have the ability to regulate the people who are under their sway. So they exist over markets, not within markets, for the most part, and in many cases, not always. And the other reason I like the word monopoly is because it gets to the point and it connects us with a whole tradition of actions that we've taken as a people to deal with similar problems.
All right, so it's got some political resonance, which I think we're going to get to the political problem that these companies pose in a second. But do you have anything to add on the monopoly versus market harm question, or should we?
Not particularly. So
okay, so is there a distinction to be made in terms of the power of the these four giant companies, Facebook, Amazon, Google, and Apple? I mean, should we, for the purposes of our conversation tonight, throw Apple out? Does Apple not have sufficient market power? Is Tim Cook just a nice enough person that we can go easy on him?
I think it's a bit dangerous to put them all together because it seems like you have something against technology. When you say, the big tech seems that all of them are evil. First of all, I don't think so. I love the technology, and I have an iPhone, an iPad, and so it's not a question of the tech being evil in any possible form or shape. And I think that they are all different in their own way. So I think it's very dangerous to bring them all together. I think that I would like to distinguish particularly sort of, so Facebook is, in my view, the most dangerous one because it's both sort of as important network effect that gives a unique position, in addition as a lot of control of the data. So it's a combination and and we're discussing earlier, is almost like a publisher. So we can think about it as a media company, not as a platform, but with some of the characteristics of the platform. So I would put like in the pecking order of danger, Facebook is number one. Then I will go to probably Google. Why? Because it's the access to everything we do. And I was reading some pretty good research that says that just the way you rank candidates based on a question impacts the way people vote on the question. So I think that is, while there is not a traditional network externality for Google, there is a huge advantage in having the data that in the past gives you an advantage in making the next search is better. So there is clearly a advantage in the technology that gives a market power regardless of what they do. Then I would go with Amazon. I am much more sympathetic to Amazon. First of all, they're not in the business of media, so they don't have the same level of scrutiny, in my view, that the other two have, because I classify them as media. And they're doing a bit what Walmart used to do in the past. Now, a lot of people hated Walmart to begin with, but there is no question that they are bringing more efficiency to the system. And then the question is, are they abusing this in some way or another? And then it's a question that we need to discuss. The thing that they make me put them before Apple is the fact that they do compete in the search business, and they are trying to become the marketplace. And the moment they become a marketplace, you would like the marketplace to be neutral, not to be owned by somebody. So in the future, I see the problem of Amazon, but it's less a present and imminent danger as the other one.
Yeah.
And I would put last in the list Apple, and it says Apple has a pretty good competitor. Samsung is a pretty good competitor. And there is not a clear sign, in my view, but I think Carl knows much more than I do, that of a sign of abuse in that position. And not being in the media business, I think, is less problematic, even if, of course, they control a lot of stuff. But,
Yeah. Okay, I'll get to you, Barry, in a second. But Carl, do you share that ranking?
You know, I kind of uncomfortable with this whole ranking. Like, why are we doing this exactly? Like, all right, maybe we didn't talk about Comcast and AT&T and Verizon. You know, like they have a lot of access power. Or maybe we should be talking about Goldman Sachs or something. I mean, you know, like
I'm going to get to Goldman in a second. I never lose an opportunity to bash Goldman.
Yeah, so look, maybe it's because I'm in the Bay Area, right, in Berkeley and San Francisco. It's like, wait, why is all the tech, you know, like what? So, but I'll play along.
No. Are you seriously proposing that Facebook and Amazon and Google have only the same kind of power that Comcast does, or a combined AT&T Time Warner does? No, I don't want to talk about political power right now, because Goldman.
No, that's not about it. But market power. I don't think
clearly doesn't.
Do you compare sort of Google with Goldman Sachs?
Why stop at pharmaceutical companies? They have life-saving drugs. I mean, so let's just say, but within the realm we're talking about, I just wanted to spread it out a little bit, like, you know. What we
but wait, answer that. Wait, do you don't think
I'm
that
not
these?
on cross-examination.
Well, you are on cross-examination.
No, I agree. I think Facebook worries me a lot. Actually, they do. Google, I should disclose, I do some consulting work for Google, so I'll just say that. So they're great. No. So I don't see as much danger there, okay, but they have a lot of economic, obviously, you know, these are immensely valuable companies. Amazon, I guess I'm going to stand up for Amazon and say, I think Amazon is great. If Amazon stopped giving good service as a retailer, I think other companies would come in online or offline. So, and I don't think that we could say that about Facebook, as Facebook is doing things like, and you could argue about it at Google, okay? But so I would make some distinctions there.
Okay, so so essentially, in the more harm than good, you would say possibly Facebook, but not Google, Amazon, or Apple?
It's more harm from good. What are you talking about? Harm from what?
Okay, so what you're saying is there is a worry with Facebook and significantly or fewer worries with the other three.
Yeah,
in terms of market
power.
How
much raw economic power
raw
they have.
economic
Yeah,
power. Okay, good. I want to get to.
They've done something
okay,
wrong
I want to
or
get
something.
to more harm than good in a second. But Barry, do you disagree? I bet you disagree about Amazon.
Well, yeah, I absolutely disagree on Amazon. But Carl made a really important point, which is, you know, Comcast, AT&T, you know, Verizon. These companies have immense power over the flow of information, for instance. I mean, but what did we do as a people 3 years ago, 2015? We passed a set of rules called, you know, roughly net neutrality. And the idea was that if you have a choke point, if you're running a communications choke point, if you are a vital pathway for someone who's trying to get to market, for someone who's trying to speak to someone else, to speak to that person, to communicate with that person, you are not allowed to discriminate. You're not allowed to favor one group over another. You have to charge everyone the same rate for the same service. This is a very, very old idea. This is what we did with railroads back in the 19th century. This is what we did with electrical companies in the early 20th century, communications firms like AT&T 100 years ago. You can trace common carriage, because this is what common carriage, you can trace this back to Roman times, to Babylonian times. If you have a monopoly that serves everybody, you must treat everybody the same. So the question, Google, Facebook, and Amazon, are they also now gatekeepers? Do they have choke points? And yes, actually, all three of them have choke points. Then the question is, you know, if they have choke points, how do they use those choke points? They use those choke points to manipulate the flow of of information, of ideas, of goods flowing between people who create things and people who buy things? The answer is yes. They manipulate it. They manipulate it actively. They engage in discrimination using first-degree price discrimination. And we could talk about whether they do that against consumers, but they absolutely use first-degree price discrimination against producers. They favor certain people's products over other people's products. They wield the power of governance over the system. So getting back to the original question, we see at open markets, we see Google, Facebook, and Amazon as very large immediate threats because of the fact that they are essential monopolies. They choke point certain types of commerce across their platforms, and they wield that power in ways that are dangerous to the public, that harm the interest of people trying to sell things, communicate things. Apple has done that in the past. Apple sort of really used its choke point power to disrupt the music space some years back. They occasionally have some problems with how they run their app store, which is, for the people who develop apps, that's an essential place to sell, to engage. But they do not use their power in the same way generally as Google, Facebook, and Amazon do.
They do price discrimination. The iPhone, the basic model iPhone costs a certain amount, and then you have the slightly higher sort of memory, and the difference in cost is not a difference the difference in price is not a difference in cost. So they do price discrimination like airlines do, like a lot of people do. So
well, airlines, and this is actually an important thing, price discrimination, what is it, right? So airlines, we're sitting in 3 seats. If we go, we're on Southwest Airlines, we're flying from Washington to Chicago, did that today. We may all have paid slightly different prices based on when we bought our tickets, but there's actually still some common carriage in that system, some common carriage rules. If we go onto their platforms on a certain day, we're going to get the same pricing for the same movement from A to B. If you are moving yourself from A to B, if you're actually trying to sell books across Amazon, if you're selling, all kinds of, like say, shoes across Amazon, Amazon will give certain book makers, publishers, different terms of service than their neighbor, their competitor. They will favor certain companies over others. They will disfavor certain companies. So that's a use of, it's called first-degree price discrimination. So there's a really big difference in our society between first degree and sort of second degree, which is when you do it by class. So say anyone who comes on, just before the flight, you're going to get a higher price. Or we're going to give lower price tickets to the theater to senior citizens. As a society, we generally accept discrimination by class, as long as it's not not race, but by class, and as long as we understand what that class is. So what we're talking about here is the ability to pick and choose winners, to basically favor this person over this person, this company over this company. It's a power of governance.
So have we seen, Luigi, in your view, adequate evidence of market abuses from these 3 companies, from Amazon, what Barry's talking about with Amazon or the other 2?
So this is a pretty tall order, and it's just, if you're saying, especially in front of an antitrust expert like Carl, I'm sure I'm going to lose this battle. But I think that, to me, and I know that Carl is defending Google in Europe, so probably is of the opposite view, but in Europe, the case that Google favors some, actually for his own shopping network over the competition, and in so doing, what is considered an abuse of a dominant position, to me is pretty clear, but I've not read the 250 pages of the report in excruciating detail. So, but what the evidence I saw seemed to me pretty compelling that was the case, and even in the United States, I think that the FTC, maybe it's when Carl Shapiro was there, but there was a report that was leaked out to the Wall Street Journal where they did find some evidence of basically discrimination.
Yeah.
They did not conclude, or at least the commissioner did not conclude that it was strong enough to win the case, but that's within the context of legislation. So I think that what I will distinguish is do we want to say, given the existing law, the existing jurisprudence, can you make a case? That's one statement. The other is, as economists, as citizens, are we worried and should we do something? Those are two very different propositions. And I think I'm much more comfortable in sort of the second than the first because, of course, depends on the jurisprudence, depends on your knowledge of the jurisprudence or whether you are US or UK or European Union and so on and so forth. But overall, I would say in the Google case, there is, in my view, pretty good evidence. In Facebook, I don't necessarily need the evidence because the situation is so strong that I'm worried even if without the evidence is there. In Amazon, I would like to see more of the evidence that Barry is talking about because as a consumer, and I know that he's concerned also, of course, a producer, but as a consumer, you see enormous benefits by buying Amazon. And so that should count for something. And maybe it's that I don't count much what I get from Facebook, but...
So, Carl, for the Google rebuttal, or?
Well, I'd rather not play that role too much, actually. I guess I would back up a little bit, just make sure everybody gets this more basic point, which is, especially in the US, but it's also true in Europe, if we have a dominant company, a monopolist, a company with all this power, under our antitrust regime, which goes back to 1890, what we look for is whether that company abused its position in some way, engaged in some anti-competitive practice. And so in the Google case, just to indicate what it's about, I mean, I can tell their side of it, but I'd rather not get into that too much. An issue that the FTC looked at and the Europeans looked at was whether they favored their own comparison shopping service, which was a separate website that you could go and shop. Okay, and which was other companies had comparison shopping services, and the question whether they were favor their own and therefore disadvantage the other ones. Okay, so even if you suppose you decide you think that Google was bad, they did that. Okay, I don't think that, but suppose it's not really a challenge or a question about their main market, right? Where there's a search engine. Okay, it's this other pretty small, much smaller market, this comparison shopping business. So. Even, under antitrust, even if you think Google was wrong there, and the FTC should have gone after them, as the Europeans have, there would be some remedy about neutrality, more along the lines of what Barry's talking about. But it wouldn't really call into question their main search engine or its strong position. But it would try to cabin them in so they couldn't use that to gain power elsewhere. And that's what's at stake, I think. But we definitely look as antitrust types for was there some practice, and a favoring there could qualify. I don't think they did that, but again, I don't want to get into it. So,
Yeah. Should we be worried about Google's dominance in search? Just only speaking about the search market?
So I think, worried, I would say this, as a user, I feel very happy with their services. Okay, it's really good and keeps getting better. And I personally am not that concerned about whatever information they're gathering about me. Maybe I'm being naive, okay, but that's me. The advertisers often feel, boy, I need to be on Google, right? Or if I'm not ranked on Google, I won't appear, I won't get business. Okay, so that's real economic power. So I think there is a legitimate public interest for sure, and are they abusing that power? Okay, because so I think the power is more on the side of people who want to be found than people who are searching.
Okay, so I want to ask now about political power. And it strikes me that you have at least two vectors of political power. The usual notion that these are powerful companies who will buy lobbying might in Washington. And we've seen all these tech giants wake up in the last decade or so to their need to influence Washington. And then there is also power over the discourse, where we see the possibility that you alluded to, where Amazon can favor certain books and blackball other books or whole publishers. You alluded to the study with Google, where by dint of people's faith and trust in the search results, the candidate who comes up first in the result is going to have a more favorable outcome, or people will be inclined to vote for that candidate simply by the search results. And then the third, when you talk about Facebook, we have seen the seemingly enormous and potentially terrifying ability for them to be manipulated and send messages to certain types of people, tailored messages. So which of these two powers are we worried about? Which is more worrisome, and are the worries overblown, or have they been actually not appreciated? Barry.
When I finished, I wrote a book called Cornered, which came out in early 2010. And when I was finishing that book up, late 2009, there was a fight between Amazon and a publisher. And Amazon basically cut the publisher off from the market for a period of time. So I said, well, having studied sort of monopsony, which is, the super large retailers who sort of, control the access to the market. I'd done a lot of work on Walmart. One of the things that you learn is that, well, most suppliers live in fear of precisely that, of being cut off from the market. Especially if this company controls 50, 30, 40, 50, 60% of the market, you're going to live in fear, because if you lose 30, 40, 50% of your revenue overnight, suddenly you're dead. So I went to the publishers, and very large publishers in New York and London, and I started talking to them, and they would, if the door was open, they would say, Amazon is our best customer. They sell more books than anybody else. Close the door. Amazon is destroying us. Amazon is so the publishers they ended up going to the Department of Justice, and they say, we have a monopoly problem here. We can go into this later, but it's like the DOJ ended up siding with Amazon because they're using this idea that any lower price whatsoever is good. But what they missed, when the DOJ went and sort of sided in this fight with Amazon, what they missed was the fact that you have publishers of books in the United States who are afraid. They wake up in the morning afraid, they go to sleep at night afraid that they will be turned off, that their flow of information, their ability to reach the people they're selling their books to, that will be turned off and their businesses will be shut down. Has Amazon ever done this? They did it to Hachette. The only reason Hachette did not go down is because most of their businesses in Europe, Hachette is a French publisher. They did this in 2014. They shut them off from the market for more than 6 months.
Okay, wait, Barry, I want to jump in here, because that's a market power question, and there are two rebuttals. If I'm paraphrasing, or I don't want to speak for Luigi and Carl, but they would say the public gets cheap books from Amazon and likes it. So the publishers are afraid of Amazon, but they're afraid because they're buggy whip dealers who are going to be disintermediated. So you must have a response to that. And then I want to get to this political power question. But
the authors
jump in after this.
Authors are afraid. We have worked, my group has worked to put authors up on stage, to talk about the things that they're talking about behind closed doors. So we have in this country, most of the successful authors live in terror of having the Amazon turn the cranks on them. They will not speak this terror in public because they are afraid that the mere speaking of this will lead to the very thing that they fear. But this is not just authors, it's not just book publishers, this is also true of news, New York Times, Wall Street Journal, The Guardian, the BBC, even things that do not have an advertising foundation to their business, they all live in fear that Facebook and Google will disappear them, or disappear half of them, or disappear a quarter of their business. And this is, so if you, I mean, this is what we have to choose in this country right now. The choice is between living in a country where reporters and publishers of news, where authors and publishers of books live in fear of a couple of super giant intermediary companies, gatekeepers, or we actually go back to something that we established in 1776, which is a system of open markets, like Adam Smith wrote about in 1776. So it worked pretty damn well.
Okay, let me get Carl in here. You're agitated to respond.
Well, let me address the political power question. So 20 years ago, the government sued Microsoft. You might remember, some of you remember that. And Microsoft ended up losing that antitrust case. But after that, Microsoft was like, holy cow, we need more of a presence in Washington. We need more of a lobbying presence, okay? They had a lot of other things besides antitrust. And over these 20 years, the tech companies have increasingly realized, yeah, we need to hire people, we need to have lobbies, we need to be present in Washington more and more than they used to. So we're talking about how much political power they have. Quite a bit, I would think. Maybe less in the current administration than the previous one. But hello, it's not like pharmaceutical companies haven't been doing this for decades. Okay, I mean, what are we talking about? How about Wall Street? You know, like, in a way, the tech companies were kind of naive and slow to get into this, and now they're playing the game like everybody else. I'm not sure they're any better at it. It's kind of come a long way to go from California, it turns out, to get to DC, so that's a disadvantage. So to me, I'm concerned overall about money in politics, but I don't think it's particular to tech.
Okay, but then they've got this distorting possibility about our discourse,
Right.
and a manipulation of people's political views, a manipulation of a potential stranglehold on the views that can reach people. Do you want to address that, or Luigi?
Let me briefly,
and then
I think Luigi's going to be the man on this.
Yeah.
I'd love to hear what he has to say. Let me just say, I think those are, we could fear that Facebook might do something intentionally as opposed to being used by some other bad actor. We could fear that maybe Google would do something politically. I don't think they have, in terms of the search. But there's so much power there over the discourse that it makes me feel like some sort of oversight's needed rather than trusting these companies to do it right.
Mm-hmm. Luigi, do you want to address this question of power over our discourse?
Absolutely. So, first of all, I agree with Carl that at the end of the day, the lobbying per se is not the worst thing. In a sense, when we see that Google spent, what, $20 million in lobbying, it sounds like an enormous amount of money, but probably they spend more in food in the cafeteria than in lobbying. It's a gigantic company, and in the grand scheme of things...
I find that terrifying that politicians can be bought for so cheap.
Yeah, actually, politicians are extremely cheap. There is Gordon Tullock, who's actually a Chicagoan, wrote very many years ago a piece that say there is too little money in politics because the return of putting money, the return to put money in politics is so large that you wonder why you don't see more money coming in. And I think that since then he wrote in 1972, the money has been coming in big quantities. But still, in the grand scheme of things, is not that massive. In fact, I was once at a conference, and Larry Summers, with an authoritative statement that he likes to make, he said, look, when I was president of Harvard, you had to at least donate $20 million to come and see me. Otherwise, you would be delegated to sort of but if you are the running president or running for president of the United States, if you donate $250,000, you are in the suite, the donor suite, and treated very well. So the fact that it's much easier to buy a president of the United States than Harvard is kind of an interesting fact. But that's aside. I think that the power, the political power of this is twofold. Is number one, their ability to be embedded with the administration and actually with the opponent. So one thing I discovered that is pretty scary is both parties have their people embedded in Facebook and Twitter during the campaign. Why? Because they all want to maximize. Now, if this is done by Trump, it's manipulation. It's done by Obama, it's so cool and tech-friendly. But they do both the same thing, okay? And the companies, this is what we don't understand. The companies are politically neutral on this. Just, it might be true that in California they're pro-gay right and all other stuff, but this is completely orthogonal to their business, okay? At the end of the day, they want to maximize profits, and whether you're a Republican or Democrat, if you give them a way to maximize profits, they are in bed with you no matter what. In fact, they are in bed with both parties, and they provide both parties access to all their algorithms, all their data, all their stuff, in order to make sure that they're well hedged. Because the worst thing that can happen to them is to have somebody who is not part of the system, because maybe it's going to change the conversation. So that is, and by the way, during the cool Obama, the Google people were at the White House 430 times in 8 years. Okay, so it's basically a revolving door, not only of employees, but people going in and out. And there is a beautiful paper written by a guy, University of Illinois, Chicago, showing that every time an executive visits the president, there is a blip in the stock price. So if you just integrate all the visits of Google executives to Obama, you sort of do a pretty significant thing. Now, to the credit of Obama, at least he disclosed the visits, because Trump does not even disclose the visits. So we can't measure that. But so I think that is number one. But number two, I think, as you said, the ability to select. Let's take a neutral case. I was reading that both Facebook and Google decided to ban the ads of Bitcoins.
Bitcoin.
Yeah, Bitcoins. Now, I couldn't care less. I think that I'm not particularly a fan of Bitcoins, and I think by and large it's a bubble. So I think that keeping some of the retail investors away is a good thing. However, I would like this decision to be done by a government, not by a private entity. And instead of Bitcoins, where ads of a new newspaper that was proclaiming a different way of looking at problems, and they decided they don't take those ads, this is sort of our freedom at risk. And if this is a small thing, I had a discussion actually with a friend that say, oh, but isn't the same thing about companies boycotting NRAs in every possible form and shape? And I said, no, it's very different, because there, the decision of United, the one Southwest and the one American, are segmented. They're not all put together. There is not one airline company that say, I decide to boycott the NRA. And if enough people want to boycott the NRA, that's what democracy is about. But if just Zuckerberg wakes up in the morning and decides that he doesn't like Bitcoins, and so Bitcoins are not going to be advertised on Facebook, what is next? And do we really delegate to somebody who maybe now after the audition decides to give up? But I think he had ambitions to run for president. And so do you want to give to somebody with that power, also the power to select? I think that would be, honestly, in my way, worse than Trump. Now, it's hard to imagine, but I think would be worse than Trump.
That is bold. All right, so what is to be done? Okay, and I'll let you answer what you want to say, Barry, and then I want you to segue into the answer. You'll answer my question, which is, we all agree that there's a certain level of threat and problem here, that it calls for some kind of government action. What is that government action?
Yeah, what I wanted to actually just build on something that Luigi said, which is very important. And actually, we have somebody here on stage, who's sort of living this right now in his life, and with Carl. A couple weeks ago, we'll get to this. I'll bring it back around. A couple weeks ago, as a lot of you probably saw, Donald Trump started to tweet madly about Amazon. Day after day after day. And then, so, now he was like tweeting about the post office and stuff, but what it ended up being read in many parts of, especially the progressive liberal community, was that this was all aimed at the Washington Post. Now, he was in the same period of time also attacking the Washington Post. Now, he does that pretty regularly. But what happened at that point, this is what's dangerous, is that a bunch of members of the progressive community, leaders of the progressive community, writers, and sort of ran to Bezos's to sort of support Bezos, Jeff Bezos, on this issue. We saw a similar thing sometime back with AT&T and Time Warner, and this is where Carl's working on this case right now, which is in court. And AT&T basically was
Just to
making the
say,
case.
for the government, Carl, a former Obama official, is working for the Trump DOJ, trying to, advocating to break up or prevent the AT&T Time Warner merger.
Yeah, so AT&T said Trump is coming after us. He's coming after this deal because he wants to harm CNN. Now, they don't even own CNN yet. They're trying to buy CNN. So the logic of this statement by them is somewhat specious. But it still captured the attention of a lot of folks, a lot of sort of people, progressives, liberals, and they ran to defend the AT&T takeover of Time Warner because somehow that was going to help protect us against Trump. It is really important at this point in which we do see the sort of rule of law threatened in many different ways, that we don't overreact and that we do not assume that the enemy of my enemy is my friend. And when we can establish, sort of understandings among communities of antitrust enforcers that we need to go after ATT Time Warner, hopefully that we're going to go after Amazon, it's really important that progressives and liberals, even if it is the DOJ that happens to be under the control of this president, we have to be very careful about assuming that that they are targeting
Isn't
the free press.
Isn't the potential for, now we're getting into the segue, but it's an important issue. Isn't the threat that that Trump raises, the specter that he raises, attacking the free press, more dangerous for society than even Amazon's economic power? And therefore,
let's ask ourselves why Bezos bought the Washington Post. Did he really need the Washington Post?
Didn't he see just a nice
Didn't
investment?
He just
Aren't
I got myself
newspapers a great
I got a
investment?
monopoly problem, so I'm going to buy this thing and stick it in front of me. And whenever anyone attacks me, it is an amazing amount of power that you get by owning the Post. Two, it actually creates it really confuses people's understanding about what the power problem is here. Maybe Jeff Bezos should not own the Washington Post.
Okay.
I'm afraid to say he's absolutely right. I think you Americans don't see it because you don't have this experience. You go everywhere in the world. In Italy, all the newspapers are owned to exert political pressure. In France, all the newspapers are owned to exert political pressure.
Yeah.
In Israel, all the newspapers are owned to political, and you keep country after country. The United States, we are the exception, unfortunately, regresses to the mean. But there is one point.
I'm a journalist. I've never influenced anybody, so
actually, that's not true.
Yeah.
That's not true. But there is one point that I think he's wrong, and he uses still the categories of progressive and not progressive. Unfortunately, there is no easy distinction between left and right. I was trying to explain today to a journalist, left and right is not the right category because let me tell you what I was shocked. Of course, the former Attorney General of New York, Bahara. He's a great guy.
U.S. attorney. Yeah.
Yes, sorry.
Yeah.
He's a great guy. He had a tweet that really disgusting in my view that said, why Bezos does not use some of his pocket change to buy Twitter and shut up Trump.
Yeah.
So if this is a progressive that asks for a rich person to buy a monopoly to shut up the opposition, Jesus, I prefer the non-progressive.
Yeah. All right. I'm gonna open it up to questions in just a second.
No, I know.
I know the audience is itching to get in here, but my answer I haven't gotten an answer to my question, which is, what should the government do? Does anybody have an answer? Carl.
I thought you'd never ask.
Yeah.
So, look, I think you should not expect antitrust to come right into the rescue. Okay, antitrust will come in if these companies do something with their economic power and abuse it, and it's a tough road to go and it takes a long time. And it's not the things we've all expressed concern about here, more political, are not with it. Just don't look to antitrust; you'll be disappointed. Okay, but regulations can do it, it's very tricky to know what those would look like. It's no panacea. I would just say, I feel like something, we have the Federal Communications Commission, which since the 1930s has helped keep the discourse open and diversity of voices and so forth, not too much concentrated ownership of media, that whole mission. And then we have the Federal Trade Commission, which since 1914 has the ability to regulate unfair methods of competition, bias, this sort of thing. I'm not saying either of them right now is doing this. I'm not even saying they necessarily can with their existing authorities, but I feel like we take them, maybe Congress ratchets this up. There are some solutions, but I think it's very hard to know exactly what they would be. But that's the direction I feel we should go.
Okay, I'm going to open up for questions. You guys can add things in a second. We're not going to be able to discuss what percentage of sentences Larry Summers starts with when I was president of Harvard.
So
Are you going to pick the questions?
I'll
Okay,
pick
great.
questions. So we definitely have a lot of questions coming in online. If you have a question in the audience, please raise your hand. Please wait for me to call on you, and please wait for the microphone to get to you. So we're going to start with the front row here. Just hold on, please. And please make sure your question is a question, not a statement.
Thank you all for being here. My question has to do more with one of the sources of the economic power of the FANG companies here. And of the FANG stocks, I think this applies more to Amazon and to Alphabet or Google than the others. But I read an interesting analysis in The Economist recently about how, historically speaking, traditionally companies that behave as conglomerates generally trade at a discount to their peers because of the perceived inefficiency of a conglomerate, and that made sense to me. However, this doesn't seem to apply to the FANG stocks. They're relatively well.
So we have a lot of questions coming in. If you just want to get to the question. Sorry.
Sure, that's okay. They're relatively well capitalized and respected by investors. Why are they not trading at that kind of conglomerate discount, like in General Electric, for example, might?
First of all, not all conglomerates trade at a discount. Number two, if you have monopoly power, you trade at least at a very high market to book, and that's exactly what they do. So that's what, in my view, their valuation reflects the expectation that they're going to get extra return. Otherwise, the market will treat them differently.
I would just say very quickly, unfocused conglomerates can trade at a discount. None of these companies fit into that category.
Yeah, and there was a huge change in antitrust law in the early 1980s. A lot of the thinking about sort of conglomerates dates back to the 1960s and 1970s. The conglomerates, kind of twisting what Carl just said, conglomerates today are a lot more focused than the conglomerates of the 60s and 70s.
Jesse, we're not going to let you off the hook, so do you have any comments? And feel free to jump in.
Okay, yeah, but nope, I don't. Let's move on to that. I agree with that. That's what I was going to say.
Great. So let's go to the far back.
There's one problem is the danger that if we just go after the new companies like Google, Facebook, and Amazon, we're going to let the old companies like Verizon, Comcast, and AT&T get away with it. We're ending up with the new versus the old, or vice versa?
And I would add to that, there are companies like Walmart or Goldman Sachs or Koch Industries that have an enormous amount of political power and influence over our discourse. So are we sort of focusing on the new thing to the exclusion of the old?
News Corp, another one you can add.
Or News Corp, one of my favorites.
It's not one or the other, okay? I would say we have some new problems that have surfaced, Facebook being the most obvious. So the public needs to adjust to that. So that's what we're talking about. But that doesn't mean giving up on constraining older power as well. It's not one or the other.
When Thurham Arnold was appointed Attorney General for Antitrust in 1938, he multiplied the number of cases by a factor of 6 or 7. Just hire more people. I don't think that there is shortage of economists or lawyers. And given the deficit, I don't think this will add very much to the deficit. In fact, might bring more fines than it costs. So it's a profitable activity for the government to do, and there is no limit on what they can do. So there's not one or the other.
Does anybody here, do either any of you three think that there's going to be a significant piece of regulation against a major industry in the next 3 years in terms of, reining in market power?
I think that there will be regulation. It will not be significant because all what we learn and what George Stigler taught us is that incumbents always create regulation to block new entry. So Facebook already said, Mark Zuckerberg said he wants regulation because that will protect against any other threat. And because of his political power, he's going to shape the regulation the way he wants. Actually, there is a great piece by Stigler written in 1954. They say the case against big business. And he says you have to break up big companies. This is not only the right thing to do, it's the conservative thing to do. And why? Is because the alternative might be worse. So if you take Facebook and you span off Instagram and WhatsApp, you already make the market instantly more competitive. And I think that's much better than any regulation that might be generated.
Barry?
Yeah, I mean, actually going back to the previous question, I think, and which is an important question, is like, are we focusing too much on the tech companies? It's we're at a moment in which we're waking up to the consolidation that's taken place in just about every single sector of the political economy of the United States. I mean, in house buying, and the manufacture of pistons for the automobile engines, semiconductors, wherever you look. Hospital services, pharmaceuticals, wherever you look, you see degrees of concentration far greater than you saw in, say, 1981. Now, Google, Facebook, and Amazon are these are the companies that are most in our face. They're providing the most pressing and urgent problems, partly because they're communications firms. They have the ability to manipulate information, as we have seen, or have other people manipulate information through them. So that's what we're focusing on. But in the process of dealing with Google, Facebook, and Amazon, and we will deal with Google, Facebook, and Amazon, we are also relearning how to use anti-monopoly across the political economy.
So I want to make sure to take a question from our online audience. And building on that, why does it appear so much easier for the EU to find and deal with these companies than for the US?
So first of all, two plugs actually. One is there is an article speaking about this in the promarket.org that makes exactly this point. And two, at the conference that the Stigler Center organizes on Friday morning, there will be the former EU Commissioner, Mario Monti, addressing exactly this point, and will be live streamed, so even people who don't participate in the conference can get it. This said, I think that there are two ways to look at it. One is actually maybe three. One is that it's much easier for the European Union to go after American companies because they go after competitors. I don't think that's the case, but some people argue this. The second, that has some element of truth, is that in the ability of these companies to capture the entire environment is stronger here than in Europe, and so there is more independence of the Commission. The third, which is the one advocated by this author in the pro-market piece, is that actually a combination of the change in the economic view antitrust brought by actually the Chicago School and the changes in the law brought by the Harvard School neuter the ability of the US antitrust to be more effective. But I would like to know, Carl, what he thinks about that.
I would add that in the United States, if the Justice Department or the Federal Trade Commission wanted to go after one of these companies, they have to prove their case to a federal judge before they get any action. In Europe, that's not the way it works. The Commission has much more power, the European Commission. It's a European law structure, not a really British common law tradition. And they can fine and force changes without going to a court. It's a significant difference in terms of what they have to prove. Whether you like it or not, it's different.
No, but wait,
Do you
but
think
then
they're-
it's challenging court. They do have to face court review afterward.
Yes, years later with a lot of deference. It's very different.
Do you think that
it really is substantially different?
Do you think that Europe is going too far? They've got the new Facebook data privacy actions, and of course they went after Google.
Well, the European, these new regulations are coming into force next month on the general data privacy. Keep an eye on those, okay? Those are strong. I think there's a lot to be said about those for individuals basically having control and ownership of their own data, you know? I wonder how much it'll affect US citizens as well, because these are global companies. So that's a regulation that's strong, and we haven't wanted to go that far in the United States yet. Maybe we'll be pulled there. In terms of what they did against Google, the action against Google, we'll see. It's on appeal. Like I said, I think it's a very weak case by the commission, and with billions of euros of fine, we'll see what happens.
There's a little bit of history, really quick, about antitrust in Europe, which actually shines a real light on antitrust in the United States, anti-monopoly. Antitrust in Europe was first really imposed on the European system by the Americans during the occupation of Germany. Why did the Americans, this is during the New Deal era, this was during, when Truman was president. Why did the Americans impose anti-monopoly onto the Germans? Because we felt that the concentration of power in the political economy was one of the main factors that led to fascism. We also imposed anti-monopoly on the Japanese. MacArthur imposed it on the Japanese in the 1940s and early 1950s. Same reason, to avoid a return of militarism. So now, Carl said that anti-monopoly in the United States goes back to 1890. That's when it was federalized, formalized at a federal level. But anti-monopoly in the United States goes back to 1773. It goes back to the Boston Tea Party, which is people standing up against control by the great intermediary of that time, which was the British East India Company. America was born, American liberty was created in a fight against the great monopoly regulator of its time.
Okay, we have time for 2 questions, so we'll take them all at the same time. We'll go here to the gentleman in the yellow suit, dark yellow suit.
Thanks. I'm going to ask a question, and I'm just going to give one bit of context, which is, what do you guys think should be our approach today around regulation, given that we all own these companies? So most people know that the S&P 500 is 20-25% tech, but a lot of people are buying, like I just did, this great ETF QQQ, which is all tech, and half of it's just the 3 companies you're talking about, plus Microsoft and Apple. So since we all own these companies, shouldn't we relax a little bit more and just enjoy the good times? Versus in 1890, when it was all controlled by a handful of guys that controlled railroad and steel. It's markedly different. You know what I'm talking about. So what are your thoughts on it?
Okay, so let's take one more question, and maybe we'll go to the lady in the back. Thank you. I'm just going to ask for a lady.
My question is that, just to clarify, we're not talking about monopolies in the traditional sense of boxing out competition, Facebook boxing out Snapchat to see who can serve the most fake news, for example. We're talking about boxing out or discriminating on the products or content that is sold or served on these platforms. And to that end, isn't Facebook the opposite of monopoly insofar as they were so non-discriminatory that they allowed fake news to proliferate?
So you have 1 minute on the clock, but I'll give you an extra minute.
So first of all, I think that the fake news is way overstated. In a sense, I think that this is the way which the Democrats explain why they lost. They invented that was not because Hillary Clinton was a terrible candidate, it's because they pay $160,000 in ads on Facebook. Come on, guys. They both spend billions of dollars in ads everywhere. If really $160,000 can make that much of a difference, we are in a much worse place in the world. So I think that let's give up. on the reality is Facebook buys everything that moves. Snapchat is the only one that resisted, but they bought WhatsApp, they bought Instagram. They now have a system to detect when another social network goes viral, and they go out and they buy it out. And yes, they use your money. By the way, who is the investor there? They use your money to overpay the other guys that are worth nothing just to maintain their position. So absolutely, I own the S&P 500 as well. Tough luck. This is when you want to have regulation, you have regulation, or you have a breakup, you do it even if it costs. Otherwise, then we're back to a plutocracy in which you go after and defend only the interest of few rich people. Because, by the way, you don't represent the majority of American people, I'm sorry to report to you.
The question in the back, I think that's a great question, because there's a paradox there, which is, okay, they have all this power, and yet they can't even keep their back door closed. But this is actually the last time we had a great debate in this country about monopoly, back in 100 years ago in the 1930s. One of the things that the anti-monopoly activists kept noting was the fact that monopolists, one of the things that happens when you get great power is you tend to become very sloppy. And even no matter how, even if you are not sloppy, it becomes, when you have incredible scale and scope, it becomes impossible, no matter how much you automate, to really wield intelligently all the power that's in your grasp. So that power just lays there for other people to use, or just is actually not even exploited, and actually important things are not built or created. So this idea that you can have too much power and then too little control over this power at the same time, that's something that has been obvious to anti-monopoly activists for at least a century.
Do you have anything to add, Carl?
I would just close. Antitrust has been primarily interested in consumer welfare. And so if we reduce market and monopoly power, we will benefit as consumers. As investors in these companies, maybe we won't do that. We have our interest may be attenuated. But if you think about the distribution of income, having products cheaper for everybody and have the ownership of stocks is very concentrated, more on the wealthy. So one of the side benefits of antitrust is it can help with the distribution of income and wealth as well.
Yes, let me make an example of this. Carlos Slim, a couple of years ago, lost his primacy as the richest man in the world and lost in a year $40 billion. Now, don't be too sorry, because he still has another 50 left, so it's a pretty good trade. But what made this difference is they introduced competition in the seller phone market in Mexico. So do you really want to restrict competition to maintain the price of the stock and to maintain Carlos Slim rich, or do you want to give a cellular phone to every Mexican? That's the choice.
Okay, I think that's all the time we have.
All right.
Please join me in thanking our panel.
Good stuff.
And you are welcome to stay. Our bar is going to remain open for further conversation. Thank you.